Welcome back. Not only this week did we acknowledge the 71st anniversary of the end of the Pacific War, but an organization of student activists also closed shop and decided to disband.
The Student Emergency Action for Liberal Democracy, SEALDs, but in Japanese, SHIELDS, so it had a nice ring to it. They said, we're giving up, and we're going to give up on the August 15th anniversary, and they did just that. They put out videos and put out Twitter commentaries and everything, but it's over. And this group that came together to fight the security legislation and to, in a certain way, try to do some backfill in terms of the legislation on the Secrecy Act, they're gone.
Right. The significance of SEALDs, though, is twofold. Number one, it was a student-led organization and it tried to pull in younger people into the political process, and I think in that part they were very effective. The second significant thing is that they showed the opposition parties that by being apart, you're never going to be able to address this huge juggernaut, which is the LDP, on this security legislation. We need to band together. And that, although they weren't successful for the security legislation, the opposition parties did band together for this last election.
And it was very significant that SHIELDS was able to take the rather decrepit anti-security legislation protests and energize them.
They did a huge job doing that.
They did a fantastic job. Instead of making it all these people who had been activists in the 60s who were worried about changes, they made it a story about Japan and about people, our future, everyone's future in terms of the security legislation, and were there night after night, day after day. Those young folks took a chance because you and I know if you are not actively working toward getting a good position in a corporation during that time period you're in college,
right.
That's what your college education is for. It's not for you to develop intellectually. Don't notice that Waseda University. I did not say that. But it's not necessarily a time for education, but a time for basically grooming yourself for the corporate world.
You want to be Big Blue.
Yes, right. You want to join You want
Dentsu to hire you. You want to work for the major corporations.
That's right. And you may have blonde hair when you go into college, but you're going to have black hair when you go to the interview. Right. That whole thing, they put that aside. And that's a huge sacrifice. Right. And extremely dangerous to their overall hireability. And indeed, the leaders of the SEALDS group say, basically we've shot ourselves in the foot in terms of our ever being recruited for anything because our names and our faces are well known and we're known as radicals and people who don't agree and don't get along and who protest. Right. Who's going to hire us? We're in deep bat guano. And it's true. Socially and in terms of career moves, this was really an unwise decision. Nevertheless, they took that path. And they took it for as far as they could. They did bring a new life to the protests, so much so that basically the government had to shut down the process of discussing the security legislation because it was losing the argument. And they just used their raw numbers inside the Diet to pass the legislation and get it done.
Well, they knew that was the end result anyway.
They
had the numbers.
They had the numbers, but the protests were effectively eroding support.
Vote with your conscience, not with your party. Listen to what you're doing. Don't pass this security legislation.
And the moribund opposition saw life there. Yes. And suddenly you saw the Secretary Generals, you saw the Policy Research Council heads of all the opposition parties showing up at the rallies and taking the microphone from the SHIELDs who were passing it to them. Yeah, here, and look who's here. And they pass it on. Suddenly we had something going. And yes, they were basically the midwives, if you want, of the birth of the unified alliance now that we see of the opposition parties that we've seen happen twice, first in the House of Councilors election, well actually 3 times. We had the by-elections for the House of Representatives where it was fairly successful. House of Councilors was quite successful and completely unsuccessful in the last case of the Tokyo governor's race, but nevertheless we have this structure and we have the SEALDs to basically to thank for it.
A student organization that became famous around the world for its opposition to Japan's security legislation has disbanded this week. Stay tuned, let's see what happens with them.